Hi there, welcome to episode 1. Who am I now in my 40s? I hope you have watched the intro episode and got familiar with the structure of this series, and now you are ready to jump into the episode 1. So here is the question that kicks it all off. Who am I now in my 40s? It sounds simple, but it is layered, right? We are not in our 20s chasing degrees or soulmates. We are not in our 30s checking life boxes and baking cupcakes for a school party at midnight, or spending all of our time and energy on others. In our 40s, it's like the noise fades just enough for us to hear our voice, but we are not sure if we recognize it. Maybe we have changed our careers or never had one. Maybe we have raised kids or chosen not to. Maybe we are divorced, widowed, happily single, repartnered, or quietly wondering why our marriage feels more like a roommate situation. Maybe we look in the mirror and go, wait, when did this happen? But here is the thing. Even with all these differences, we share something powerful. We are women in our 40s. And that alone means we are in the middle of a story the world rarely talks about. The chapter where we stop being defined by what we do and start wondering who we are. Let's get honest. There is no universal answer to who am I now in my 40s. And I'm not here to pretend I have the answer. The best answer we will find is our own, shaped by our life, our culture, and our wounds. And accepting that freedom to not have the same answer as everyone else, that's how we stop making self-destructive decisions just to fit into someone else's version of normal. The old script of grow up, get married, have kids, work, age gracefully, and disappear politely is not working for everyone. Letting go of that fixed past can be scary, but it is also liberating. We get to rewrite our path on our own terms. To answer the question, who am I now? We are starting with identity. Unpacking what our identity is made of and how it has been shaped. Because understanding our identity is the first step in making sense of who we are now. We are all born into a set of circumstances, health, family, geographical location, and culture that shape who we are before we even realize it. Through our 20s and 30s, life events push and pull at our early identity. Sometimes we feel like we are losing ourselves. Other times, we realize we are evolving into someone truer. By the time we reach our 40s, the question often becomes, has the life I have lived so far truly reflected who I am? Was I shaped by choice or by circumstances? How much of me has been survival and how much has been the truth? Maybe facing all these questions is the midlife crisis everyone talks about. The 40s is a decade that invites reflection, recalibration, and sometimes reinvention. In my view, identity isn't a fixed thing. It is shaped, reshaped, and refined through our life chapters. So let's go through the factors that shape our identity early on in life. I believe the first factor that shapes our identity is the physical body and health we are born with. Our body and health form the foundation of what we later come to know as our identity. We start our lives grounded in one thing that we often take for granted, our physical health. As children, unless something forces us to notice otherwise, we just are. We move, we run, and we bounce back. Most of us don't even realize that our bodies are carrying us until something goes wrong. For many, the importance of physical health doesn't click until much later in life. Maybe when a diagnosis appears, or energy disappears, or aging starts whispering reminders. But for some of us, story begins much earlier. For me, it got personal at age 15. That's when I began dealing with health issues that changed my relationship with my body, my energy, and eventually my identity. When our body becomes a limitation at a young age, we grow up with a very different lens. And here is the truth no one says out loud. When our health feels fragile early on, it shapes everything. The way we dream, the risks we take, the paths we choose, the people we keep close. It defines our choices, sometimes quietly, sometimes drastically, but always powerfully. Among all the things that shape our identity, I believe we can influence and even change many of them over time, like our family, our environment, and our choices. But when it comes to health, especially the one we are born with, this story is different. It becomes the base of our structure, and unlike the other layers, it's not always the one we can change. We learn to live within it, adapt to it, even rise above it, but it always leaves its mark. So if this is the structure of your story, please be gentler with yourself, especially on the days we get critical or feel behind or wonder why life feels heavier than it should. Be kind to the person who fought their first battle before they even had the words to describe it. Health issues can make us harsher on ourselves, but we have to remember, not everyone started the same. Some were born with strengths they never had to question. If your story came with a fight, honor that. We are not behind. We are just carrying a story that most people will never fully understand. This is not a sad story. It's just a real one. And for those of us who have walked the path, it's the start of understanding our identity from inside out. The second factor that shapes our identity is the family we are born into. From the very beginning, our families write the first chapter of our stories, sometimes with care, sometimes with chaos. The presence or absence of our parents defines our identity more than we realize. If we grew up with a mother or a father who loved us deeply, who made us feel safe, valued, and protected, our story begins with a kind of grounding many others never knew. But if a parent left or passed away too early or was physically present but emotionally unreachable, our story starts from a very different place, one shaped by loss, longing, or self-reliance far too soon. And woven into that early foundation are the roles we are given in our immediate family. Often we didn't choose them, we inherited them. The responsible one, the rebel, the peacekeeper, the fixer. We played them to survive, to belong, or to be seen. It is only later in adulthood that we begin to ask, is this who I really am? Or is this who I had to become? And that's where the real work of identity begins. In questioning what was handed to us and deciding what we want to carry forward. The third factor that shapes our identity is our relationship with our siblings. If parents write the beginning of our story, siblings often fill in the margins, sometimes with love, sometimes with rivalry, and sometimes with silence. For some, siblings are built-in best friends, the kind we would sacrifice anything for without hesitation. For others, they become distant strangers, or even the most painful source of conflict. Siblings are our first social training ground. We learn about protection, competition, loyalty, and how to resolve or avoid conflict through them. And yet those early roles can stick with us like glue. As we grow older, we start asking, who am I outside of this sibling dynamic? Am I still the protector, the forgotten one, the peacemaker? For me, my siblings were the reason I fought through every chapter of my life. I never wanted to leave them disappointed. I never wanted them to feel alone in this world. That sense of love shaped so much of who I became Not because someone told me to, but because love made it impossible not to. And yet, even now, I ask myself, what parts of my identity were built from that love? And which ones were built from fear of letting them down? The fourth factor that affects our identity is the place we are born and cultural norms around womanhood. Where we are born doesn't just give us a passport, it gives us a blueprint for what it means to be a woman. In some parts of the world, that definition is loud and clear from a young age. Be quiet, be good, get married, and sacrifice. Even where women are told we can be anything, many of us still grow up running into invisible walls and expectations we never agreed to. For those of us who grew up straddling cultures, immigrant women, third culture kids, we often live in the tension between two definitions of womanhood, neither of which feels fully our own. I grew up in a part of the world where even letting my hair down and feeling the wind through it was a dream. A silent act of rebellion I could only imagine. That kind of pressure, it carved a fighter out of me early on. I didn't just grow up with rules. I grew up carrying the pain of women around me just to exist. Their silence, their compromises, their resilience. I felt it all, and it rooted itself deep inside me. It shaped how I see freedom, how I define strengths, and why I still carry a fire for every woman who had to shrink herself just to survive. And that early lesson did more than hurt. It built courage. It taught me not to care what norm expects of me. If the world wanted me to nod along and stay in line, I walked the other way. I've always swum against the current because being expected to say yes just makes me ask why. And if that makes me difficult, rebellious, too much, so be it. I'd rather be all of that than be someone I never chose to become. The fifth factor influencing our identity is our career and the shifts it undergoes over time. A career isn't just a corporate ladder or a corner office. It can be anything from being a stay-at-home mom to running a company as a CEO. It's any role that demands our energy, commitment, and identity. Many of us start our careers thinking they will define who we are, and for a while they do, until they don't. Layoffs happen, passions shift, burnout creeps in, the kids grow up and leave the house. Suddenly, the daily responsibilities that once filled every corner of our identity are gone. And we are left asking, who am I now? If I'm not this job title or this role as a mother, then who am I? Because here is the truth. Careers, like so much else in life, often come with expiration dates. And if we have built our entire identity around the title, a role, or a paycheck, the end of that chapter can leave us feeling completely lost. There is a deeper truth beneath that. Work only defines us when it aligns with our truths. Raising kids, building a business, caretaking, creating. If it is what we truly want, then that path is meaningful and worthy. And yet, not all of us had the freedom to choose. Many of us were pushed into our careers by circumstances. A career, in whatever form it takes, should ideally provide financial stability. Because when the money is scarce, our options shrink. Too often we find ourselves adapting identities we never consciously chose. The overworker, the silent partner, the self-sacrificer, simply because survival demanded it. Real freedom isn't just about chasing dreams. It is about having the resources to make choices that reflect who we are, not just what we can afford. Whether we are leading a team or building a home, the work that shapes us most is the work that let us live on our own terms. And let's be honest, our career path shapes us tremendously in our 20s and 30s. After the influence of our family environment, it is often the first arena where we begin to truly meet ourselves. It challenges us, stretches us, and if we let it, helps us grow not just professionally, but personally too. And if we are lucky, along the way, we meet coworkers who leave a mark on our identity forever. Not just because of what we achieved together, because of who we became in their presence. So the critical lesson is this: our career can be a part of us, but it should never be the whole of our identity. The sixth factor shaping our identity is changing relationships. In our 20s and 30s, relationships often feel like the center of everything. Friendships evolve, some fades, lovers come and go, new people arrive and leave their mark. And without even realizing, we start building our identity around who we are with. We become her best friend, his girlfriend, their ride or die. These relationships shape how we see ourselves until one day they shift or disappear, and we are left staring at a version of ourselves that no longer fits. That's when the real reckoning begins, because by the time we hit our 40s, life has shown us its truths. That people don't always stay, roles don't always last, and identity cannot be outsourced. This realization pushes us inward to finally look for answers not into someone else's eyes, but in our own. And we begin to realize that the most important relationship we will ever have is the one with ourselves. So we start listening more closely to our inner voice. We try to understand who we are from the inside out, not based on who loves us, but on how we love ourselves. And that, maybe for the first time, becomes enough to begin again. The seventh factor influencing our identity is motherhood or child-free life. Becoming a mother changes our identity instantly. It rewires our priorities, our body, our sense of time, everything. Some women mourn the version of themselves they had to leave behind, while others feel like they have finally met the person they were always meant to be. And on the other side, not having children, whether by choice, by timing, or by circumstances, carries its own deep reckoning. In a world that so often ties a woman's worth to her ability or decision to become a mother, the identity questions run deep. Either path reshapes us, often in ways we never saw coming. But by the time we reach our 40s, the question underneath it all starts to surface more clearly. Am I enough as I am, without the labels, roles, expectations? Who am I? And the work of this chapter becomes less about proving our value to the world and more about finally believing it ourselves. The eighth factor shaping our identity is being single, married, divorced, or widowed. Relationship status isn't just a detail on a form. It deeply affects how we experience ourselves and how others respond to us. Marriage can blur the boundaries of I in favor of we, sometimes so much that we lose the sight of our individual identity. Divorce can feel starting from scratch, rebuilding piece by piece. Being single in our 30s or 40s may feel empowering and self-defined one day and deeply lonely the next. For those who are widowed, the loss can feel as if a part of our identity was taken without our consent. These statuses carry expectations from society, from family, even from ourselves. But here is the harsh truth. Any status can change in a second. And if we have built our entire identity on it, that change can feel like the world is falling apart. By the time we reach our 40s, we start to ask a deeper question. Does my relationship status define who I am? Because if it does, we risk losing ourselves when the status shifts. The work now is not just about finding love or partnership. It's about finding the version of us that remains steady, no matter how our relationship status changes. That version, that is the one worth rooting for. And the last factor influencing our identity is cultural identity, especially through an immigrant lens. Living between cultures means living between identities. It's speaking one language at home and another in public. It is eating one kind of food around our family while craving something else to blend in. It is dreaming in one tongue, but being expected to thrive in another. In our 20s, we might shrink ourselves to fit, soften our accent, adapt our behavior, hide parts of who we are just to avoid standing out. By our 30s, the longing to reclaim what we tucked away starts to grow. And by the time we reach our 40s, something deeper settles in. The desire to finally define ourselves, not based on what makes others comfortable, but on what feels true. Cultural identity shows up in everything, from the big things like careers, values, to the small ones. For example, my original legal name is a beautiful, meaningful, and full of cultural heritage one. After moving to the US, over time, I realized most people weren't willing to say my name, remember it, or even try. So I had to choose another name. I picked Mana, a simple name that in Persian means something that lasts forever. It was a way to navigate the world without erasing myself. And even now, I haven't let go of my original name. It still lives in me and always will. So turning 40 isn't just about getting older. It is about finally seeing all of ourselves clearly, honoring every layer, and deciding I get to choose who I am now, and I no longer need to apologize for it. I believe we have covered main aspects of what shapes our identity by the time we reach our 40s. The health we are given, the family we are born into, the culture that raises us, the relationships we build, the career we pursue or leave behind, motherhood or the absence of it, the status of our love lives, and the layer of living between worlds. These are the threads that have shaped so many of us, sometimes quietly, sometimes forcefully. But this is not meant to be a closed list. It is a living conversation. If you feel there is something I've missed, something that has been a defining part of your identity journey, please let me know. I would love to hear it and honor it. This space was never just about me. It is about us and the truths we uncover when we reflect together. So now, which parts of our identity feels like a choice and which ones were handed to us? What pieces are we keeping and what are we ready to evolve beyond in our 40s? By the time we reach our 40s, our identity becomes less about survival and more about intention. We are no longer just the daughter, the employee, the partner, or the roles others choose for us. We start asking deeper questions. Who do I want to be now? What do I value? What version of myself have I outgrown? And what version is still waiting to emerge? The 40s are often seen as a turning point, Not because we become someone new, but because for the first time we give ourselves full permission to be who we truly are. So maybe the real evolution is this. In our 20s and 30s, life shaped us. In our 40s, we shape ourselves. So grab a journal or open your note apps. I want to ask you a few quick questions. Don't overthink, just answer honestly. Ready? First question. When you were 10, what did you want to be when you grew up? Second question. What do you spend most of your days doing now in your 40s? Last question. What your 10-year-old self would be proud if you still would do? Now look at your answers. Between who we were and who we have become, there is a clue to who we are right now. That space in between, that is the becoming. I want to share my answers. When I was 10 years old, I always wanted to be a writer. Always. When I was very young, writing was like a fire inside me. It felt natural, almost like it was part of me without me knowing why. I didn't learn it, I didn't chase it, it was just there, wild, alive, and effortless. I was obsessed with books. While other kids were saving up for toys and candies, I was hoarding coins to buy books. My summers, I would start a new book the day school ended and read day and night until I finished, then head back to get another one. I even wrote here and there about different subjects over the years, but my writings always ended up in the trash. As I got older, life got louder. School, pressures, expectations. I ended up studying engineering because I was great at math. And slowly, that fire in me dimmed. By the time I was in my 20s, writing felt like something I had packed away in a childhood drawer and forgotten about. Fast forward to my 40s. I would spend most of my days in a 9-to-5 job. I was working as a project manager up until a month ago in a biotech company, managing a multi-million-dollar contract, leading teams, and basically making order out of chaos. And I did love it, especially the part where I got to ask people the kind of questions that made them think. But then, boom, I got laid off. Just like that. All my energy, all my heart poured into a project that suddenly wasn't mine anymore. It shook me. It was my first layoff experience anyway. Then I found myself sitting in silence, asking these same 3 questions I'm asking you right now. So my answer to the last question. My 10-year-old would be proud of me doing this series, Women in 40s. For me, it is this exact moment, this series. The spark for this series came from 2 places that seemed unrelated at first, but now feel inseparable. One was the deep love I've always had for writing. The other was something beautifully ordinary. A weekly meetup with my female friends that I explained in the intro episode. In those friendly conversations, I realized how much we all needed to reflect, to feel seen, and to ask, is this it? Or is there more? That's when this idea clicked. The writer in me, the one who used to stay up all night, devouring books, and dreaming of crafting stories, finally met the woman in me, who has lived a little, loved a lot, gotten fired, and kept showing up anyway. It all came together in this idea. A space for women in their 40s to explore who they have become and who they still want to be. This was my chance to stop chasing and start choosing, to slow down, to finally ignite the fire I've always felt inside, not just burn out trying to keep everything else lit. And maybe, just maybe, share that spark with you. At first, I was paralyzed with fear. Even thinking about doing this series felt overwhelming. The idea of writing, then actually recording myself, terrifying. I've always been shy and insecure to the point that in my 20s and 30s, I always avoided cameras. So much, I barely have photos from those years. Something I truly regret now. And I would recommend to all younger women to love themselves and take lots of pictures in their 20s and 30s. All I could think was, what if I fail? What if no one watches? But eventually, I had a talk with myself. If I'm lucky enough to reach my 60s and someone asks me what I regret, I'd rather say I tried to be a writer and it didn't work, rather than I was too scared to even try. So this is me showing up and trying. And I hope this small act of bravery inspires you to take this step for yourself too, because courage is contagious. So, that is how this whole series began. Now you have the full story. With me sitting and thinking about these 3 questions that I shared with you. I'm so glad you are here. Now I'm passing these same 3 questions to you. Let them simmer. We don't need perfect answer, just curiosity. Remember, between whom we were and who we have become, there is a clue to who we are now. So after all this talk about identity, here is a question I want to leave you with this week. Is it even fair or possible to label ourselves in one word? Can one label hold all the things we are? I mean, maybe in our 20s we tried, I'm a dreamer, I'm a doctor, I'm a mom. But in our 40s, we have lived too much. We have shed too many skins. We have grown into too many layers to fit into just one word. And yet, sometimes we want a label. We want something that gives shape to the fog around us and helps us answer, who am I now? So here is my take. If we had to label ourselves right now in our 40s, don't choose a job title. Don't pick a relationship status. Pick a word that feels alive. Something that reflects not just what we have been, but what we are becoming. I'll go first. Right now, I would label myself as truth walker, meaning I walk with my truth in any situation, even when it is uncomfortable. What about you? What is the one word label for you? If you like to share, drop it in the comments. I would love to hear what's emerging in you. We have covered a lot so far on identity, and we have explored a lot in this episode. That brings us to the end of our first episode. I'm so excited to keep this conversation going with you all next week. See you in episode 2, the masks we wore and still wear. We are going to talk about all the masks we put on and how to know when it's time to take the mask off. See you then.